Hello and welcome to another episode of Alyssa Critiques Alyssa. In this series, we're taking a look back at the maps that I have done previously, sometimes 20 or 30 years ago, and I'm pulling them apart. Which is not strictly true. What I'm doing is, I don't want to critique other people's maps, but by God, I can critique my own. And over the last 20 or 30 years, I've definitely evolved my style, even over the last 5 years. And there's some things I did in the past which have definitely shaped how I approach maps today. And there are some things I did in the past where I abandoned it and I moved on. And here we're going to identify both things, what worked and what didn't work. And we take one map at a time. I never look at it before the actual broadcast. And we do a deep dive. So today we're looking at a map that I am going to call Dros Delnoch. You can actually see it right in the top there. Now Dros Delnoch is, if I remember rightly, a David Gemmell book. He actually did several books. I want to say back in the 80s or 90s. I never read them myself. This was for private use for a friend of mine. He did read David's books. Actually, ironically, they were both called David. So David requested this map for a David Gemmell book, and he was enraptured by Dros Delnoch. And I'm going to show you the original artwork here. This is by Gerard Miley. Miley. I'm going to go with Miley. And it's gorgeous. I mean, look at this thing. It's a beautiful, evocative piece. I never got to see this artwork. I don't even know if it existed back then. Certainly, this is an era that was slightly before the rise of the internet, and I never got to see it. And I'm going to come back to this piece because I never got to see it. I was working off my friend's description. He's like, hey, I've this great city. It's called Dros Delnoch. I want to bring it into a Dungeons and Dragons game that I'm going to read for you or run for you guys. It's this massive fortress. I think it's got 7 walls. Each wall is named, and it's between it's in this valley pass between cliff faces. It's the world's biggest and best fortress, and it's probably a pretty accurate description. This picture is way more evocative, though. So I ended up drawing this for him. Now this is the colored version. So let's go back to the original. This is the black and white. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So you won't get to see it all in one go. Now I was tempted to kind of tilt it on its side. Excuse me. So you could get a better sort of aspect ratio on it. But this is how it was originally drawn. And it was drawn ink on paper. Very fine pens that were available back then in England. Super small nibs, but ultimately you can tell my black and white maps because of where I've got writing is clearly hand drawn. I would hand draw on top of a ruler to get these straight edges, but then it gives a very flat bottom. So but also it's very black and white, and I mean that literally. There's no grayscales in here. There's ink or not. So you could always tell those pieces, but also you could tell my ink pieces because in the past they used to do this type of thing. And I'm gonna let me zoom in. You see this? It's almost like, am I shadowing? Am I implying some kind of slope leading away? Either way, this doesn't work because where's the shadow on the other side? You know, where's the shadow on the other side of this? So this is something I don't really do anymore. I've mentioned that in previous episodes, and I didn't do it even consistently on this one. I kind of used to like the ... near my towers because it looked good. It didn't have any practical function on the map. So this is definitely one thing that I've pulled away from. And even here, though, if I'm going to critique myself, this is a poor implementation of it. Because I would expect at least to do it on all sides of these towers here, except maybe where we're hitting the cliff face here. So that's the first thing that leaps out at me. I do like, by the way, what I'm doing with the border here. I moved away from one black line to 2 black lines. I'm drawing this for a friend, so I try to sort of kick it up a notch, right down to where I'm going to write the title, the name of the actual city itself. So overall, you know, some good features that I've done, even right down to these walls kind of falling underneath this. And when you think that I'm doing this whole thing sort of ink on paper, there's no take backs, so not bad. But what's not working? Well, what are we doing with these cliff faces here? I used to, I experimented for a while using contour lines, and I think that can work pretty well, but not in this context. I'm not even, I mean, I think that's what I was shooting for here. You could see, let's kind of do a zoom in. I've kind of got this, okay, so we've got the outer wall, okay, fine. And then we've got this contour coming up. I can see what I'm shooting for. But then I've got this type of effect going on. And I think I would have been better off doing another contour and doing another contour. And leaving this type of hill till later on. I think in my head, when I was first drawing this, I was almost certainly intending for these 2 outer contour lines to be the cliff. That's it. So anything on top of the cliff are now hills. So we've got one hill here, and I guess we've got another ridge or something here. But visually it doesn't work. I draw my hills and everything differently now. I do my steep lines coming down like little dashes differently. And I would probably do a line like this with dashes coming off. I would do another line with dashes coming down, and I'd probably come out to about here or so with very steep embankments. I think that's how I would approach it, and it'd be visually easier to see. This, while interesting, I think it's fair for me to say that it's confusing. It almost looks like a Damascus blade, doesn't it? And so I would not do it that way. Things I would do the same though is the way I've got these dashed lines, so the roads, I like that. I still do that today. I draw digitally so I can get a fainter line in there, but ultimately my approach is the same. My bridges, I do a little bit more detail on them, but they're ultimately not too different than that. So, you know, kudos to younger Alyssa for blazing a trail on this. I like my swamp, or the marshy outer edges. I think that is part of the Dros Delnoch lore, that there is some certainly that there's nothing in the outer walls, right? These are sort of dead zones here, but I think this is correct. I think it's a detail that I wouldn't have added unless I was told. But with one thing is I see this river coming through, right? And in the artwork, I'm not seeing it. So that might have been an embellishment requested by my friend, which is okay, cool. This is something ultimately inspired by Dros Delnoch. It is no way associated with it. It's not, intending to be a copyrighted piece of work or anything like that. You know, my friend's got this idea for this fortress between 2 cliff faces. He probably changed some things. Now, walls and battlements. I mean, look at these. I do my walls differently now. These are straight lines. That's all that this is. And it works. It visually works. But nowadays, I actually like to have the crenellations represented and the actual walkway behind there. So the complete battlements. So I end up with, a soft grey line, and I end up with a dotted black and grey line for my battlements, and I now bring that into my towers as well. So you'd see the crenellations on all of these towers. Considering that I drew these by hand, by the way, not bad for roundness. These 2 are pretty good. They're a bit wonky. That one's more of an oval, but not bad. But definitely crenellations showing on these battlements. Also, notice how the gates, let's zoom in a little bit here. Notice how my gateway has no connecting wall here. I'm almost implying like this is a 4-tower, almost a mini keep, certainly, gatehouse. And I think I should have drawn a battlement over the road. And I probably should have linked these 4 towers, or at least had connecting walls north and south between them. So that's just a small detail that I would do nowadays. This is just visually incorrect. The dotted texturing here, by the way, I like it. I'm okay with it. It's harsh because it is ink on paper. Nowadays, I can be softer. I can vary and move away from dots a little bit. Do little sort of texture shapes and so on and so forth. But ultimately, I do still have ground texturing just like that. So this is looking, honestly pretty good. This is not a bad map at all. And then I like the idea of what I'm doing as we come south. We get more and more, let's call it civilization, more and more sort of occupation. We've got like this totally open area here. This one is open, but we've kind of got some tents or some huts or something like that. I tend to draw my little shacks a little bit differently now. I like my shacks to lead up against each other a little bit more. And if I'm going to have tents, I draw them outright as tents, little tent ropes and things like that, and the ridge of the tent going across the top. So I'd probably redraw this section, but for actual content within each wall, I think it's fine. The river, I don't. This is almost holding back to dungeon maps, where they do the little sort of a squiggle of water shape on a pond or a pool, a water feature of some description. I did this a lot. I don't do this at all nowadays. I draw ripples of water sort of following the flow, so to speak. So that would do differently. This area, again, same observation. I would draw that a little bit differently. Just way more shack town, I think would be the phrase. And here, this, I believe, if my memory recalls this correctly, this is like, okay, so we're getting our first permanent buildings cropping up here. We're about sort of the 3rd area in. Yeah, these are probably military buildings. Nowadays, I would almost certainly draw military parade grounds and practice yards, melee areas, archery ranges, that type of thing, to really invoke that military feel. I would draw barracks. What is the thing about barracks? They're almost uniform in appearance. They're lined up perfectly, right? And if we drew something like that here, you would look at this area and you'd go, military buildings. You'd just see it. You'd see marshalling yards and things like that. So I would probably approach how I shaped these and the types of details a little bit differently. And then as we come into the city proper, and I think the original David Gemmell sort of Dros Delnoch, again, I've not read the book, but my impression is it's a fortress. My friend, using that as inspiration, kind of wanted it as more of a town. This is a place where the players in the party can go. And so we definitely have this sort of town feel going on here. We'll take a deeper look at that in a moment, with the massive fortress behind. This is totally not Dros Delnoch or anything like that. This is just, from his description of this big fortress at the top of the hill. And I think within that, this definitely works. But it kind of looks like the whole town is in front of the fortress. I mean, it kind of is. I would probably take this fortress and shift it up. And so we would end up with like this bastion wall, bastion wall, bastion wall, nothing here, some peasants, etc., or just people eking a living, like with some shack towns, a deeper shack town, deeper into the city, military sort of buildings and yards, etc., fortress. And then the actual town proper would be behind it. I almost certainly would do that. Almost certainly. Now, for building shapes themselves, not bad, but if I'm going to be critical of myself, I would say, while I love these sweeping roads, and they're very, European, medieval European, aren't they? I think for a military structure, and primarily this is, I would have had some major roads that were easy to sprint down or march down. Way more from the fortress down towards the defensive points. Like, you know, do not pass go, do not collect 200, just there from A to B, because that's the purpose of this, right? So I definitely would have put this up here, but I would have made sure that at least the roads going from this to this were more direct. For a town that probably huddled behind the fortress, or at least in this instance in the shadow of the fortress, it probably grew up over time, you know, buildings like, you know, people just wanted the protection of the main fortress itself and kind of spilling out from there. So I think having a natural sort of growth to the road system as well, I think is fine. I like the shapes that I've got here. I do think there's a certain amount of lack of definition of blocks. Let's call them, I'm going to call them city blocks or town blocks. Like, I'm going to give you an example, like right here. I can see that this, and this, and this are intended to be 1, 2, 3 city blocks, with a fourth up here, and then we've got 1, 2, 3 roads coming through. But I would probably draw these nowadays so they were a little bit more continuous. The gaps between them are a little bit too prominent. If we join some of these together, this would join this block and this block into a more cohesive whole, and it would actually then better define the roads around them. It would better define the individual neighborhoods. So if I was going to be critical, I would definitely do this. See, like in this area here, this block is a lot more solid. This block is a lot more solid. It's a bit wonky in shape, but, you know, okay, but that's fine. But generally, the city as a whole, the blocks are too loose. I think I'm going to make that observation. Then we do get towards the fortress itself. Now, the fortress, yes, apart from actually moving it forward in this whole thing, we're missing gatehouses, we're missing battlements, we're missing crenellations. I'm missing a sense of height here. Like, if I was going to do my little dotted shadow, why not underneath this walkway? I don't know. I've taken a stab at some kind of, like, little implication of battlement here, which is kind of cool to see. But it's loose. You know, there's a certain looseness here. Like, what am I dealing with? Okay, they're bigger buildings, but is this a pond? Is this a pool? What is this? I think it's meant to be some kind of courtyard, and likewise with that. I think these dashed lines almost imply farmland to me nowadays. I probably would have textured that a little bit differently. I'm kind of okay with this sort of moat thing that's going on. Like, I kind of actually really like it. I definitely would have made the bridges bigger, more significant. Got some pillars out the side of them, some statues. Made them a real big deal. And the outside edge, I tend to sort of slope it in now with a little sort of dashed line, so you get this shoreline a visual effect. This is definitely coming up. I believe that's my intent. This is a higher area. Again, the buildings just feel too loose, too scattered, and I'm not getting from my drawing what they're meant to be. Like, okay, I've got some kind of keep here, I've got some kind of keep here. But are some of these temples? Are some of these barracks? Is there a training area here? Is there stables here? I don't know. I would ramp up the detail on them to get those details. Almost the voice of the building itself visually represented a little bit clearer. I also would tend to draw little paths in often walked areas here. I mean, this is pretty good, but I think I would have done a little bit around here, and probably, honestly, we need some texturing on this land. It's too white. All of this land. I don't know why I didn't do it. And now we're on the other side of the fortress, obviously, and we start getting into my farmlands. See what I mean about, okay, we've got farmlands, and so these are also farmlands? I don't know. So I would definitely make sure my texturing of my farms versus courtyards were better defined. Getting some bushes in here wouldn't be a bad idea. A little bit. I mean, I've got 1 or 2 trees. I mean, that's cool. But some little tiny bushes, I think, are needed. You can see I've carried the contouring on, so I've got my hills. Don't do hills like that nowadays, and that's fine. So, this is okay. I like the shape, by the way, of my roads. I like how they're breaking up. It's an interesting shape. We got a river coming in. They've clearly then sort of shaped the river to form this moat, and then it sort of then flows on beyond. Generally speaking, not too shabby, but this generally looks flat, right? And this artwork, which I never got to see at the time, this artwork implies more of an elevation. So I think if I had seen the artwork and my friend wanted to base a fantasy city on this, I would have tried to capture more of this. This is like getting these elevations, getting these the sense that one wall was bigger than the others. I also think they look a little bit closer, but I know that he wanted to have a city in there and so on and so forth. But I definitely love this sense of that you're looking up. You can see all of the walls. I love that. Visually, it's very striking. And you've got this one big keep and towers at the back of it all looking down. Ominously so. Now, while we're not drawing Dros Delnoch exactly, I will say that visually, I love that. And when I try to draw my cities nowadays, or when I try to draw any of my maps, I always put myself as a person on the ground, and what would I see? And then I try to draw that. So I think if I was to redraw elements of this, I definitely would push this up, and I would probably have a big keep over here. Maybe here, a big keep, and I would do some elevated sections, probably starting here. Like elevate this wall, elevate this wall, elevate this wall. So you just looking at the map, it would just come up, and then coloring. We could then get some deeper and deeper and deeper shadows in as we actually go down the map or down the hill, I suppose. And normally I do my light source, by the way, in the top left, just as my default, and so all my shadows tend to fall into the bottom right. I would flip it. I would do a source of light at the bottom shining right down the valley, because then that way I've got a great excuse to get these deeper and deeper and deeper shadows in the further you go down the valley, and that would help give a sense of height to the walls as you're coming up, because there'd be less shadow on the other side of them. That, I think, would look visually spectacular. I kind of want to draw that map now. So, yeah. Now, into colouring, this was a black and white map that I did for a friend. And that was that. In fact, I don't even think, honestly, it was used. But I did get it coloured. Years later, like 20, 30 years later, we coloured it. And some of the details pop out because of it. Again, I would probably do the shadowing on the other side. This wall is clearly the same elevation as this. It's the same elevation as this. Now, with a different bit of inspiration, I would flip that. So we were coming up in height way more. But this functions very well. Notice, got rid of those contours altogether. They just don't work. So, completely different approach to actually showing the cliff edge here. And it has a different feel because of it. I do think that you get a better feel for the water. Notice, water texturing gone. Just do it in colouring. This works great. You don't need those squiggly lines, And change the contour here to actually be hills. Much, much, much nicer. I should have got rid of these labels. Whatever. And I think this area stands out a little bit better too, because we're able to actually define our keeps and such. This just... Well, actually, honestly, it's the wall thickness, isn't it? Line versus actual proper wall. So this, honestly, is an iteration. It's definitely an iteration beyond the first one. I love this colouring. I do think my design decisions, though, are still relevant about moving this keep up and so on and so forth. And honestly, I feel like even if we didn't move this keep up, there should be some more major structures here, military structures, instead of just the walls. And again, get some straight lines through with the roads for quick troop movements. I feel too, just for the sake of interest, because I'm all about visual interest on my maps, that I probably would have done some kind of like path, you know, when they etch these paths into these snaking, you know, cliff sides, etc. I probably would have tried to capture some kind of path coming through to these areas here. Just narrow paths. Maybe, because I think visually, anything that makes an onlooker to a map go, ooh, what's this, is a win for me. And I always try to get at least something like that into every map that I do. How would I rate myself on this one? How would I rate myself? Well, you know, because I actually feel there are some design issues with this. Like, we're missing gatehouses, we're missing correctly drawn gatehouses. I'm not a fan of the contour approach now. It has a time and a place, but this is even a bad implementation of contour lining. Alyssa, I'm sorry, but I just got to call you out on that one. And because our neighborhood blocks are not perfectly defined or better defined, including down to, is this a military area? Is this a keep? What am I looking at here? I think I have to knock a few points off myself for this particular map. And I'm going to knock another point off for the partial dots. I mean, if you're going to do it, do it. I like this. This is not bad. I like this. I like this. And then I just gave up. I just stopped doing it. We've got some ground texturing in, but not consistently so. And not in the places where I'd actually want to see it the most. I'm going to give myself a 6 out of 10 for the black and white. And I think it's worthy of an 8 out of 10 for the color version, because the color version corrects a lot of the issues that we were seeing. And it's honestly, I think, feel a little bit more visually attractive because of it. So 6 out of 10 and 8 out of 10. That is what we are going to give ourselves. The city of... Well, it's actually called Vaatmery, based upon the Dros Delnoch original from a novel series from some bloke whose name forgets me. David Gemmell. Just, okay, David Gemmell. Those are my scores. I actually kind of like looking at my own maps and critiquing them. It makes me feel or recognize where I've evolved, all those little things that I've now brought forward. So hopefully you enjoyed this little walkthrough with me, and I will see you in the next one. Now, if you do want to have a print of this on archive quality canvas, you can get it from nobledwarf.com. You'll be looking for Vaatmery, link in the comments below. You can also get it on t-shirts, on hoodies, or on the side of a cup. So until then, thank you to all my Patreons. Thank you to all of you wonderful Twitch subscribers. I will see you maplings on the flip side. Thanks, everyone.